Hello, everyone. Welcome to the History Media Podcast. I'm your host, Freddie Beltran, and this is my co-host.
I'm Precious Bautista.
And I gotta, and we're gonna be talking about James Bond's in the entire 26 movies. And I got a question for you. Um, what James Bond did you start with? What's your favorite movie, and what's your favorite actor?
Hmm. I was born in 2001, which I think was towards the end of the Pierce Brosnan era, which is my first movie. It was Die Another Day, I think, with Halle Berry. Not
Mhm.
my favorite though. My favorite actor and my favorite movie are like the same. It's Daniel Craig, and it's Casino Royale, which is his first one. What about you?
I was born in 1999, so I would I would also have to say Pierce Brosnan and Die Another Day. But again, my favorite actor has to be Daniel Craig, and my favorite movie has to be Casino Royale for the gambling scene and the
Oh,
first book accurate uh martini drink.
okay, fair enough. Copying me, but
Yeah.
whatever. Uh, I guess we can get it started then with the first three Bonds. The very first movie is Doctor No, which came out in 1962. It's, you know, starring Sean Connery, which is the first James Bond and arguably considered by many to still be the best, which I think is crazy. That just shows like how great he was as the character. His run lasted from 1962 all the way to 1983, technically. Um, but did you even know that he wasn't even supposed to be James Bond? He wasn't the first choice at all.
No, I didn't know who was supposed to be the first choice.
It was actually the author of James Bond, Ian Fleming. He wanted George Lazenby, who would actually end up being the second James Bond. He thought that Connery was too unrefined and like an overgrown stuntman, but Fleming's girlfriend was the one to tell him no, like Connery is the one. So that finally led to the release of Dr. No in 1962. It's the first film in Eon Productions based on the novel by the same name from Fleming. It's about Bond traveling to Jamaica to investigate the disappearance of another British agent. It introduces a lot of the series staples with the opening gun barrel sequence, John Barry's iconic theme, exotic locales, and the way that Bond says his name and drink of choice. It's all in this movie. It started with just a $1 million budget and was a financial success when it came out, bringing back $60 million in the box office. It got mixed reviews upon its release, surprisingly, but over time it garnered a lot of support and it's considered the best introduction and one of the best films of all time, and it's the first one. um, so that leads me to the next movie, From Russia with Love, and we all know that the first three Bond movies for Sean Connery's run are like amazing, top tier, and I'd love to talk about it more, but what I really want to get into is Sean Connery's like piece de resistance almost, which is Goldfinger. Came out in 1964. It was actually supposed to be on Her Majesty's Secret Service next, but it was canceled. Like, did you know that?
No, I didn't know that.
I know that's crazy. Like, and On Her Majesty's Secret Service isn't even in Connery's thing. It's George Lazenby, which was next. But the reason why they didn't film On Her Majesty's Secret Service with Sean Connery is because they thought that it was too hot in Switzerland in the time and they needed snow for this movie. So Goldfinger was released and they replaced the director, Terrence Young, to Guy Hamilton because of the pay dispute that Terrence Young had. It's the first film not really focused on Spectre, and it has Bond investigating some gold smuggling and finds out some plans that the villain is trying to contaminate the United States Fort Knox depository. Um, yeah, it's also the movie that I debuts the iconic Aston Martin, which is a DB5. You said.
Yep, it's the DB5, and it's constantly been reused in a lot of Bond films, especially the most recent ones with Daniel Craig. It's just an iconic car that's stuck around.
Yeah, like I'm not familiar with cars at all, so Freddie was the one that told me all this information. But it also includes this pre-credit sequence that's totally unrelated to the movie, iconic to Bond films, and really establishes the humor that would be in a lot of Bond movies throughout, that whole tongue-in-cheek thing. It came with a $3 million budget, which is the combination of the first two movies combined, and came back with about $125 million at the box office. Critical praise, financial success, and was the first Bond movie to ever win an Academy Award just for Best Sound Editing, but still, like, pretty renowned nonetheless. The next movie we have up is Thunderball. Came out in 1965. It brings back Terrence Young as the director. It took a long time for this movie to be released, actually, because it came out in 1961, but there was like this whole legal dispute that happened with it, with the original author and like some other people saying that he stole the story. It had a $9 million budget, which is pretty huge after Goldfinger jumped from 3 million to 9 million, and it exceeded every one of its predecessors in terms of how much it got back with 141.2 million, but it also overachieved with the next five Bond movies after that, which I think is pretty crazy. Um,
Yeah.
it's the first Bond movie to shoot in widescreen Panavision and has a running time for 2 hours, had pretty mixed reviews, still won an Academy Award for Best Visual Effects. And the final movie in Sean Connery's run is You Only Live Twice, which came out in 1967. It has director Lewis Gilbert, and the person who wrote the screenplay is Ronald Dahl. Like, do you know who Ronald Dahl is? I was kind of surprised when I was
Yeah.
researching it.
I'm not familiar with Ronald Dahl.
Yeah, he's a children's book author who wrote like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Matilda, like all the stuff that you used to read in the as a kid. So you wouldn't really expect him to, write a Bond movie.
Yeah.
Nothing really notable happened. It's a good movie. It was pretty well received, did well in the box office, but it's only important just because Sean Connery announced that this would be his last movie while they were filming in Japan, and that he would retire for the role as James Bond for the first time, actually, which leads me to want to ask you and talk to you about something. Do you think that we should go by actor in terms of how we're going to talk about this franchise, or should we go by chronological release of the movies? Because Sean Connery does come back.
Yeah. I think we should go by chronological order. Start from the very beginning and end with every movie, lined up in a nice little package.
Okay, for sure. Yeah. So if we're going by chronological order, then Sean Connery will get back to later. Up next is On Her Majesty's Secret Service, which came out in 1969. They replaced Sean Connery with George Lazenby, who is an Australian model who had no acting experience and also features the directorial debut by Peter R. Hunt. So you would think, like, just based on that alone, no acting experience, directorial debut, it would be like a hot mess. It's just about Bond facing like an iconic villain who's planning to hold the whole world ransom by threat. And it's considered to be the most accurate adaptation of all of Fleming's novels in terms of like book to movie, and it has the first and only time that James Bond has ever married like the girl in the movie. It also includes another iconic car. You mentioned this to me too, Freddie. It's the DBS, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the
And
one right there.
yeah, and in later Bond films, it gets a revision. But this is an iconic car nonetheless. That constantly is reused again. So another really cool looking
Yeah,
car.
that's dope. I know nothing. Looks the same as the last one to me, but to each their own. Pretty cool fact nonetheless. It is here though that George Lazenby announced that this would be his first and only Bond film. It's actually, he admits years later in a documentary, it's because his agent told him not to do it anymore. He was on a 6 movie contract, and his agent told him, "Don't do it. Like, James Bond is not going to be successful during the hippie culture era. You should focus on Western movies." But after he like declined being Bond again, they blacklisted him from Hollywood, which is sucks.
Interesting.
Just got a
Yeah.
bad deal. I know, right? And because of this, Diamonds Are Forever is released in 1971, and they begged Sean Connery to come back. They paid him $1.25 million to come back to the role. It's his final James Bond movie under Eon Productions, and we'll get back to that later. And it brings back Guy Hamilton as the director. And if you guys don't recall, Guy Hamilton was the same director as Goldfinger. And basically, with this movie, they were just trying to recreate the success that Goldfinger had. It has the same like premise almost with the whole smuggling, something rich, diamonds, gold. It's the same. They really wanted to bring that back. And even though it was positively received when it came back, did well in the box office, got nominated for an Academy Award years later when people reflect on it, they're not really feeling the movie as much anymore. And so the next movie, Live and Let Die, comes out in 1973. They decide to replace Sean Connery, or Sean Connery declines to come back again with Roger Moore. They keep Guy Hamilton as the director. And what's interesting about Live and Let Die is that it's released during the blaxploitation era, so it has a
Hmm.
lot of like racist and like sort of stereotypical undertones, especially including Black people. But what is interesting about it is that it introduces the first ever Black Bond girl in it. The film is still pretty generally received well, and I think it's interesting. I can't really feel this movie just because of its sort of like racist undertones, but people thought it was a good first movie for Moore, even though he wasn't the same as Connery. But his next movie, The Man with the Golden Gun, came out in 1974, almost killed the franchise completely. Like it did awfully, like critically, and it did okay in the box office, but just because it got torn up to shreds by critics and audiences, they weren't sure what was going to happen with the future of James Bond franchise until 4 years later, after a 4 year hiatus, The Spy Who Loved Me came back in 1977, and it basically saved the whole franchise. Have you seen The Spy Who Loved Me? It's considered to be Moore's like best film.
No, it's been kind of tough for me to watch the old Bond films. I'm getting to them, but I couldn't watch every single one of those
Yeah,
movies.
I've been trying to at least do research on the early ones that I've been assigned to do. So I did watch it, and it is my favorite Moore film also. It brings in director Lewis Gilbert, and it's the 10th Bond movie, critically praised, financial success. People really thought that Moore came into his own in this one. It even got 3 Oscar nominations, which is really, really good. And I'm not sure. You mentioned this to me also. You said that Elon Musk bought the car. Was it also an Aston Martin? He bought it for $1 million,
Uh,
you said?
yeah, he did buy it for $1 million, but this is not an Aston Martin car. Not every
Oh,
Bond movie has an Aston Martin car. Some of them have Fords, and this this one, the couple bought it in a storage unit for $100. They didn't know what they had in their hands, and then when they sold it off in an auction, Elon bought it for $1 million.
that's insane. The profit off of that, and the fact that $1 million is like pennies to Elon Musk. But good for them, honestly. But speaking, of Elon Musk, that reminds me of space, which leads me to the next movie, Moonraker, which came out in 1979. It's the last Lewis Gilbert directed movie. It's about Bond like traveling to a bunch of places, and it eventually leads him to like outer space. And it's considered a spy-fi film, which I think is really interesting because I had never heard of that before. It was made during the Star Wars craze, which is why everybody wanted it. It had a production cost of like a huge amount, $34 million, and came back with 210 in the box office. Then we have For Your Eyes Only, 1981, directorial debut of John Glenn. It's all right, but what I really want to talk about for a second, Freddie, is this next movie because I think the title of this movie is ridiculous. And I don't think, I want to say that it didn't age well, but I feel like it was still outrageous for 1983, which came out, which would be Octopussy. it, it sounds like a weird hentai, to be honest. Like that, maybe that's just me. There's the poster right there. It came out 4 months before Sean Connery's Never Say Never Again, and they had to like convince Moore to come back because by then he only was on a 3 movie contract and he would just agree to go on more movies. But because Sean Connery was coming back with a non-Eon Productions affiliated Bond movie, they wanted to keep him to try and compete with that. And he ended up signing up for one more movie after that, which was A View to Kill in 1985. Director John Glenn again. It's his last Bond movie, and it didn't do well, unfortunately, for him. People criticized his really old age because he was 57 at the time, which was older than Sean Connery when he was doing his last Bond movie. And they thought that it really reflected in his performance. It still did well in the box office, but Moore just ultimately decided he didn't want to come back as the role and he was just going to let it go. And I think that even the production team wanted that for him too. So that wraps it up for the first 3 Bonds. Is there anything you wanted to say?
With Roger Moore, it kind of reminded me of the Netflix movie The Irishman, bringing back old actors, very old actors, and trying to make them seem like they are younger than what they actually are. I mean, when in the movie Robert De Niro, Joe Pesci, they had to basically act like younger versions of themselves, but they're old people, so they walk like old people, and
Right.
they act like old people. You can't really change that. It comes with the age. So that that's what the Roger Moore movie reminded me of.
That's crazy. 57 is not even that old. So I don't even know. People are just tripping, honestly.
Yeah, but I mean, 57 for a spy. That's really old.
Okay, fair enough. But they did decide to bring in a younger actor, after Moore,
Yeah.
obviously, right? Right, Freddie?
Mhm. Yeah. So basically, they brought in Timothy Dalton. Uh, and this movie is called The Living Daylights. It was released in 1987, and it was directed by John Glenn again. Um, it had a it was his first movie, but Timothy Dalton was asked to do previous movies beforehand, but he
Oh,
felt like he was too young, or a lot of the movies that they did ask him on, there was no script, so he didn't want to take a movie with no script, so he kind of declined off of that as well. And this one's pretty interesting. This is the last movie to be composed by John Barry, the iconic
oh,
guy who did most of the Bond soundtrack.
right.
And this movie's about Bond helping a KGB officer, George Kovsky, defect during a symphony performance. During his debriefing, Kovsky reveals that a policy of assassinating defectors has been instated by a new KGB head, Leonid Pushkin. But as Bond explores his threat, a counterplot surfaces involving shady American arms deals and a pair of Russian assassins, Nekros and Karla Milovi. And I think that movie was pretty good. I watched it, and I had a lot of fun with it. And I think the comedy was really well done. The
Yep.
next movie is License to Kill, which unfortunately was also Timothy Dalton's last film. The
Oh,
problem with the movie was because they had gotten into a legal battle, and Timothy Dalton was supposed to do three movies, and they did film a third movie, but because of the legal issue, they never released it, which caused them to retire in 1994, which was the end of his contract. The movie itself had a budget of 32 million, and it made back in 156 million, and it was generally positive reviews, and the critics couldn't really fall in love with the darker tone of this Bond movie. And the movie's about after capturing a drug lord, Felix Leiter is left for dead and his wife is murdered. Bond sets off to hunt for Sanchez, but not everyone's happy. The M16 does not feel that Sanchez is their problem and strips Bond of his license to kill. Hence the movie.
hmm.
Bond is more dangerous than ever, and he gains the help of one of Leader's friends known as Pam Bouvier and sneaks his way into the drug factory which Sanchez owns. And now, the next Bond that comes into play is Pierce Brosnan. He was supposed to actually be the actor for both of these movies, License to Kill and A View and The Living Daylights. He was supposed to be the original actor, but they actually brought in Timothy Dalton because at the time that they were going to film these movies, Pierce Brosnan was in an NBC show. It got
What
canceled.
show?
Um, I'm not sure, but it got
Ah,
canceled,
hmm.
and during that time, um, it was up in the air whether the NBC show would come back and ruin the filming for the Braun movie. But they were like, "Oh, let's make it so where he could do both." And then they came into a dispute and just said, "Look, you're either gonna be a Bond or you're gonna be a part of this NBC show." He chose the NBC show, and then he came back much later with GoldenEye, which was released in 1995, and it was directed by Mark Campbell, and it was composed by Eric Serna. This was the first movie to not have any use of the Ian Fleming novels, but GoldenEye, the title itself, was the nickname for Ian Fleming's beach house in Jamaica between 1952 and 1964, where he wrote almost every Bond novel and short story.
Interesting.
And another interesting little fact: Pierce Brosnan hurt his hand before the start of this movie
Of course.
in his house in Malibu. So his hands were doubled by his son, who was 22 years old. Yeah.
Wow.
So he was the third assistant trainee on the second unit, and it basically required him to pull a handbrake on the Aston Martin DB5, flipping open the glove compartment to reveal a bottle of chilled champagne, and using a laser in the opening bungee jump scene, and cutting through the floor of the train with the laser in his wristwatch.
Oh my
And
god.
this movie's about years after a friend and fellow double zero agent is killed on a joint mission. A secret space-based weapons program known as GoldenEye is stolen. James Bond is set out to stop a Russian crime syndicate from using this weapon. And the next Pierce Brosnan film is Tomorrow Never Dies, which was released in 1997, and it was directed by Bruce Fernstein and composed by David Arnold, which you will hear a lot. He does come back for a lot of the soundtrack. The budget was 110 million, and it made 333 million in the box office, becoming the fourth highest grossing film of 1997 and earning a Golden Globe nominee despite all the mixed reviews that it was getting. And it was the first James Bond film after the death of the producer, Albert R. Broccoli, and it does pay tribute to him at the end of the credits. And
That's
Anthony
sweet.
Hopkins was supposed to be a part of this movie, but quit 3 days after the screenplay because there was no script. And Anthony Hopkins then joined the Mascazoro, which was directed by Bomb alumni Mark Campbell instead. And
Hmm.
interesting little trivia: 15 BMW 750Ss were destroyed in this movie. Imagine how much money they had to spend just on getting BMWs. And
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know cars, but I want a
yeah,
BMW.
yeah. And the next James Bond movie is The World Is Not Enough, released in 1999, directed by Michael Apt and composed by David Arnold again. It had 135 million as the budget, and it made back 368 million. It received mixed reviews, with the plot itself and Dennis Richards' casting being frequently criticized. So, not everybody is a fan of this movie. And the next
Yeah.
movie, which is the last Pierce Brosnan movie, is Die Another Day, which it was released in 2002, and it was the second James Bond movie to ever have a black um, Bond girl. The movie itself had a 142 million budget and made back 431.9 million. And this movie specifically marked the 40th anniversary for James Bond's films, and in,
Oh.
and the film includes references to each of the preceding films. So this was just a big culmination of every film. But this movie was also pretty interesting. It brought over I think another Aston Martin, and this one had really heavy CGI because they had to do invisibility for that Aston Martin, and it didn't look so hot. It was pretty not great, and
Hmm.
a lot of critiques were on the CGI. And this movie is about
Hmm.
James Bond is investigating the connections between North Korean terrorists and a diamond mogul who is funding the development of international space weapons. So, also
Hmm.
this movie, the last James Bond movie, was the last movie to ever talk about the Russians in terms of the Cold War aspect of it. So that's why this movie talks about
Yeah,
North Korea instead. And the next James
that
Bond,
makes sense.
everybody knows, in 2006, it was Casino Royale, and it was the first movie of Daniel Craig. And an interesting story was
My
Daniel
boy.
Craig wasn't even supposed to take this movie. He was gonna
Ah.
turn it down. Yeah.
Hmm.
Apparently, he initially rejected it, didn't want to do anything with it, but he changed his mind after he read the final script, the finished script. This was the most iconic movie. The gambling scene is fantastic. The torture scene was hilarious when he was asking him to scratch his nuts.
Right, right, yeah.
This movie also has a Guinness World Record attached to it. The car that they used was the DBS, but it was a much updated model of the DBS, making it a lot harder to flip over, which is exactly what they needed it to do. So instead, what they did was they put a gas canister under the Aston Martin, but most of the time you would test it and see how much you would need in terms of pressure to flip the car. They didn't do that. So when the
Mhm.
car flips, it does full 7 rolls and then comes to a stop, and
Right.
that's why it won the Guinness World Record in 2006. And
What a
the,
random record.
I know, and this is the rendition of the Vesper Martini, which is the most book accurate version of the martini. Which is, if anybody wants to drink it, it's 3 ounces of gin, 1 ounce of vodka, and half an ounce of dry vermouth with a lemon peel for garnish. And Daniel Craig also lost two front teeth during this film, and the dentist had to from London to Paraguay to replace them.
Mm-mm.
And the premise of this movie is, after earning the double O status and license to kill, secret agent James Bond sets out for his first mission as 007. Bond must defeat a private banker funding terrorists in a high stake game of poker at Casino Royale. Bond falls in
Right.
love with Vesper Lind, a Treasury employee assigned to provide the money he needs for the game. The film, be- the film begins a story arc that continues over to the 2008 film Quantum of Solace, which is directed by
Right.
Mark Forster and composed by David Arnold again. This title was chose from a short story For Your Eyes Only, and the budget was around 200 million, and it made about 580. $89.6 million. And this movie was generally mixed, but everybody loved Daniel Craig's performance, and the film's action sequence were criticized, and it felt more realistic and the darker tones, which people
Eh,
don't like about James Bond films. They like it to be more lighthearted.
right. We can just,
Um,
kick it off to the next movie.
yeah. So the next movie was Skyfall. Skyfall was released in 2012 and was directed by Sam Mendes and composed by Tom Newman. The budget was around 150 million, but it made back a ridiculous 1.1 billion dollars. And not only that, it is stayed as the top grossing Bond film, and no other Bond film after Skyfall would ever make that money back. It
Hmm.
won. It had seven accolades, including two Academy Awards, two BAFTA Awards, two Grammy Awards, and it got overwhelmingly positive reviews. It is the best. And there was a commercial for the Olympics that had Queen Elizabeth II,
Everybody
where they
loves
drop
Adele.
in with she drops in with Daniel Craig from a helicopter, which is hilarious to me.
Yeah.
Uh, the next two movies, um, Spectre was kind of alright.
Right.
Um, Overall, in general, it's kind of just a whatever movie, but it did make a lot of money back. And
Hmm.
then No Time to Die, the final James Bond movie and the final Daniel Craig movie. He was the most emotional there, and it was directed by Kerry Jogi Fukunaga, and it was composed by Hans Zimmerman. So that was no more David Arnold, um, and this was the last Daniel Craig movie that everybody knows. And in general, um, now this movie only made 333 million back, but because of COVID, it's understandable, and it
Yeah.
kind of sucks.
I think we
But
get that.
yeah, but I think in general, I'm super excited for the next James Bond. I heard it's supposed to be a female, and let's see what happens to the entire franchise after.
Yeah, I'm super excited for that. So, make sure let everyone know like what your favorite Bond movie is, what your first one is. But tune in for the next episode. I think we're talking about Star Wars next. Is that right, Freddie?
Yep, and I got my
Yeah,
big Yoda plushie in the back,
right.
baby
So
Yoda,
everybody look forward to that. Thank you so much for listening to the Media History Podcast. I'm Precious Bautista. That's
and I'm Freddie
Freddie.
Beltron.
Exactly. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Peace.
Peace.